Some photographs from old America look too strange to be real. A man climbing a courthouse wall, an airplane collapsing in front of soldiers, children working at night, and police pouring evidence into the street. But these are not movie scenes. They are real photographs from the 1900s, and each one shows a piece of daily life that sounds impossible today. This man was called a human fly because he climbed public buildings for crowds. The strange part is not only the height, it is how normal the spectators treated danger when a camera was nearby. At Fort Myer, early aviation still looked like cloth, wood, and hope. When the Wright Flyer crashed, it proved that the future of flight would be built through public risk. This family reached Ellis Island with their belongings packed around them. The photo looks quiet, but it shows the first hard moment of becoming American, waiting, proving, and hoping. These Brooklyn Bridge painters look as if they are standing on lines drawn across the sky. Their job was ordinary maintenance. The danger was treated as part of the work. Before airplanes looked modern, they looked like experiments that should not leave the ground. Crowds watched because the machine seemed impossible even when it worked. This was not a small hidden bottle. Some moonshine operations became full mechanical systems, large enough to fill barns and silos before police tore them apart. Prohibition turned ordinary rooms into crime scenes. A raid could leave behind broken furniture, seized bottles, and a photograph meant to prove the hidden economy existed. This map is not decoration. It marks places where alcohol had supposedly been bought during Prohibition, turning a city plan into police evidence. The strange part is how invisible crime became visible only after investigators drew dots on paper. Luna Park was designed to overwhelm visitors with towers, lights, rides, and strange scenes. It looks unreal because amusement parks were still inventing the language of spectacle. The circle swing at Luna Park was sold as wonder before amusement safety had a modern language. Riders were lifted into the air as part of the show, while the park itself turned risk into entertainment. At night, Luna Park became an electric city. The lights made Coney Island look impossible because electricity itself was still a public spectacle, not just background decoration. Coney Island sold amazement by making the impossible feel casual. An elephant beside amusement towers was not fantasy art. It was part of the spectacle people paid to see. This view of Coney Island looks like fantasy architecture, but it was a real commercial machine. The park learned that crowds would pay to walk inside a dream built from towers, signs, noise, and light. Judy the elephant was not only an animal attraction. In images like this, the elephant becomes a symbol that could sell politics, amusement, and spectacle at the same time. The Elephant Bazaar turned a living animal into a landmark. Visitors came for the strangeness, but the photograph also shows how early entertainment often treated spectacle as more important than limits. These boys were not acting for the photo. Many sold papers late into the night, sometimes around saloons, because a few cents could help a family survive. This group was photographed at 9 at night, when some boys were still selling around saloons. The shock is not only their age, it is that night work was normal enough to be documented openly. S. Russell was 12 and had already sold newspapers for 2 years. The caption records his average daily earnings, turning a street portrait into a ledger of childhood labor. Street trades made children part of the city economy. A boy with papers or goods could look independent, but the photo hides the pressure that pushed children into adult routines. Before instant messages, cities used actual boys to move notes, calls, and errands. Some were sent through streets at hours that would be unthinkable for children today. This messenger was on duty from 8 in the morning to 6 at night. Before phones and radio dispatch became ordinary, a child could become the moving wire between offices. The young messenger looked small because the job was larger than he was. He carried requests through traffic, weather, and adult spaces that were not built for children. Another St. Louis messenger appears almost posed, but the work was not symbolic. The city depended on boys who could run errands quickly enough to make business feel instant. The boys in this cigar factory looked too young for the room because they were. Reform photographers used images like this to make child labor impossible to ignore. The photograph looks unusual because the world around it has disappeared. Once you know the context, the strange details become evidence of how fast American life was changing. At the Tampa cigar box factory, investigators found small boys and girls, even when work was slack. The phrase "bad reputation" in the source caption says almost as much as the photograph. This apprentice was described as one of the smallest the photographer found. The picture is quiet, but the detail matters. Slack work was the only reason even more children were not visible. Glass factories needed speed, heat, and repetition. In these photos, the children stand beside tools and furnaces that belonged to an adult world. The so-called ball team was made mainly of glass workers. The title sounds harmless until you remember that these boys belonged to the factory first and to childhood second. Frank Clark and another carrying-in boy worked around glass before they were old enough to look believable there. The image makes the factory scale clear. The children are small beside the work. The bottle machine was promoted as progress, but the caption says managers still claimed there were no boys under 14. That denial is exactly why photographs like this mattered. Canning work followed the harvest. Families moved with the season, and children often joined the line because every pair of hands mattered. These cartners were not even the youngest workers at the cannery. The line in the caption changes the whole image because it tells us the camera was still missing smaller children. Nandy Gallant was 9 years old and packed cans at Eastport, Maine. A single name and age make the scene harder to dismiss as just an old factory view. Breaker boys sorted slate from coal in dark, dusty rooms. The photograph feels unreal because the workers look like school children, but the mine treated them as part of the machine. Hine wrote that the Breaker boys were suspicious of his motives. That detail matters because the photo was not casual. Everyone understood the camera could expose the mine. This Ewan Breaker photograph records names, not just faces. Philip Curato and the others were documented because reformers wanted the public to see children inside the coal system. The coal-picking machine was photographed as a possible replacement for Breaker boys. The strange twist is that the machine looks like progress only because the human alternative was children in dust. Inside Ewan Breaker, boys sorted slate from coal for long hours. The rows look organized, but the organization is the problem. Child labor had become part of the industrial design. Cotton mills could make childhood disappear into rows of machines. The captions from these investigations often recorded ages that are hard to believe now. Layla Prater appears in the records of a children's home, but the archive caption also questions age and health. The photograph becomes evidence because it preserves those uncomfortable details. This little spinner in Newberry, South Carolina, was one of many described as small. The machines around her explain why reformers used scale. The child is nearly swallowed by the mill. Hine wrote that the girl tended her sides like a veteran, then admitted she was tired. That sentence turns the image from a work scene into a record of exhaustion. Some oyster workers began before dawn, and children were part of the labor system. The photos feel quiet, but the schedules behind them were brutal. At 5 in the evening, young oyster shuckers were photographed going home from the cannery. The time matters because the same caption says the day could begin before sunrise. This second oyster shucker view repeats the names because the children were not anonymous symbols. Lena Kruger and the others became evidence of a schedule adults had normalized. One little worker carries a baby home after a day that began at 4 in the morning. The image is painful because work and childcare appear in the same small body. Carrie was 7 years old, leaving Pass Packing Company at 5 in the evening. The caption gives the missing number. Her day began at 4 in the morning. In some tenements, work followed families into the kitchen. Children and parents assembled small goods at home for tiny pay, turning the family table into a factory bench. This homework investigation shows how factory labor entered private rooms. The table is the clue. Home did not always mean rest because piecework followed families indoors. Another New York homework scene shows the same hidden economy from a different angle. The work was cheap, repetitive, and easy for employers to keep out of public view. Early 20th century policing was often photographed like a public performance. Uniforms, wagons, suspects, and crowds all became part of the official image. The Chinatown arrest photograph shows law enforcement, race, and newspaper spectacle colliding in one frame. The source title names rival factions, but the camera also stages the suspects for public viewing. This reviewing stand is not a crime scene. It shows policing as public ceremony. Famous guests and uniformed officers turn authority into a performance for the crowd. The Royal Lilliputians image belongs to entertainment history more than policing. It shows how novelty acts were marketed with language that feels jarring today because the public paid to see different staged as comedy. A second Royal Lilliputians image makes the promotion even clearer. The old wording advertised bodies as spectacle, which is why the photograph feels stranger after you know the context. 8-year-old Jack was photographed on a Massachusetts farm as evidence, not nostalgia. The image looks simple until you realize the photographer was documenting children whose workdays belonged to adults. New York steel workers made the skyline by standing where most people would freeze. What looks like a stunt was just construction before modern safety culture caught up. The razzle-dazzle at Coney Island did not need movie effects. It used motion, noise, and crowds to make early amusement feel like controlled chaos. These women were not posing for a polite portrait. They were picketing the White House in 1917, turning the sidewalk into a political battlefield before American women won the vote.